All right, so I'm going to make one last short video about magazines. Just a few things. One of the things that makes magazines important is their ability to reach very specific markets. And one of the things that's kind of interesting with technology that's making magazines more and more interesting is their ability to sort of target um, very specific groups. And there was a magazine that a few years ago, I think it was called Reason, that what they did was they took their subscriber base and they were able to take the address that they were going to mail the magazine to. And so if they were mailing it to 101 Main Street, they could then pull up a Google map of 101, an image from a satellite picture, and they could then put that on the cover with your house kind of pinpointed, and then you'd get a picture of your house on the cover. And they were able to do that for their entire subscription. They were able to print off like 100,000 magazines, and each one that arrived at the house had your home as the cover. And so there's a lot more focus on the idea that even like a magazine like Time, Time actually has something like 80 or 90 up until the recession. I don't even know what they do now, but they had 80 or 90 different versions. They had Spanish-oriented ones. They had one for each state. They had one for different ethnic and political groups. I mean, and they had very fragmented audiences. And the idea is the reason they did that was not only because they target their content, their editorial content to that, but they could also focus their advertising. So a company in Chicago might buy an ad in Time if they knew they were only going to be selling in Midwest, because they know people aren't going to come like a getaway to Chicago ad from the Chicago Tourism Bureau would have a great value in Illinois or Wisconsin or maybe even Ohio, but it's not going to have the same value of like spend your weekend, checking out the fine dining in Chicago. Probably won't make the same impact as it would in Florida. And so by being able to differentiate and separate their market, they're able to sell more. And so with technology, that has become a big part of it. Because of that, the market's very fragmented, but the advertisers become very, very, very important. If you pick up a magazine, one of the fun and interesting things is magazines are highly, more than half of most magazines, major magazines, will be advertising. And even stuff that may not appear to be advertising is actually advertising. Most advertisers want the first 20 to 30 pages. So when you open up a magazine, what you'll find the first 20 to 30 pages of your magazine will actually be advertisements. It won't be anything to do with the content. It will be all ads. And so the other thing about that is they also allow for the advertisers to have the control to say, I don't want my ad to run if this type of story runs, or I don't want my ad to run adjacent to this. And there's a lot of rules that come in, and so that firewall between the newsroom and the advertising is very thin, and that's because that's how magazines have been able to survive. In other issues facing magazines, I just have a couple more I want to talk about. Talked a little bit about issues with body image in the previous video. Advertorial being an issue. The ad pull policy. And then the last thing I think that's kind of interesting about magazines is the issue of circulation. Magazines are like newspapers. Usually more than one person will read each magazine. And so there's a group that's called the Audit Bureau of Circulations. And I think they changed their name recently to the Audited Media Bureau or something like that. It's slightly different. But it used to be called ABC, Audit Bureau of Circulation. But now it's like the Audited Media, something like that. Audited Bureau of Media, Bureau of Audited Media. I don't know what it's called now, but it has a slightly different name because it's trying to also get the online. It's trying to measure that. And basically, like if you sell a newspaper, you sell a magazine, they want to know what the circulation was, which is why they still tear off the front cover of the magazine, because then they can send out, they say we sent out 5 copies. They've got back 4. That company can come in and physically count the number. They can physically audit the number of magazines returned, and they don't have to pay to ship the entire magazine back, and they're able to get the circulation. And then the advertisers know, because if a magazine sells 10 copies, you're not going to spend as much as if it sells 50 million copies, right? But if it sells 1,000 copies to the right 1,000 people, like the Bride magazine or the Train magazine, that's very valuable. But a magazine that sells 1,000 copies to the right group is less valuable than one that sells 2,000 copies. So that's a big part of it. But the other thing is there's what's called the pass-along rate, which is how many people read the magazine that that is the same magazine. You know, you go to the doctor's office and there's a magazine sitting there. How many people read that same magazine? How many people have the magazine and then look at it? The one that stands out that I find the most interesting is there's a magazine called Handguns, and they have a circulation of 114,000 number of subscribers to Handguns magazine. This magazine is all about handguns, rating handguns, looking at handguns, pictures and sales of handguns, things like that. But the number of people who read that magazine is 5.4 million, meaning that the average magazine is read by over 50 people. Meaning that every time somebody buys that magazine, they put it in a gun place, somebody picks it up, looks at it, and it may sit there for years. And what happens is they find that hundreds of people actually end up, reading some copies of this magazine. I find that almost hard to believe, but that is a significant issue and one that it becomes hard to quantify and measure the entire industry. As far as the industry goes, they say 80% of people still prefer the printed version of magazine, 55%. Of web subscribers also get print. More than half of people who subscribe will access it online as well as in the print form. So there's a kind of a convergence of those two markets. And in 2013, there were 1.23 billion magazine editions read, meaning, you have 20,000 magazines. Each one printed so many, multiplied by the number of pass-alongs, and you get 1.23 billion magazine reads, which is a lot of reading. All right, bye.